All right. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Harrison. Today, we will be going over a brief history of milk and milk consumption and a fundamental milk bottle identification guide, useful, I think, for any new historian or archaeologist attempting to identify and date an antique glass bottle of milk that they may have come across. Let's begin, shall we? And when I say begin, I, of course, mean begin at the very beginning of human consumption of cow milk. So, around 7,500 years ago, according to this most recent genetic study, the mutation known as lactase persistence, as geneticists call it, first appeared around Central to Southern Europe around 7,500 years ago. In the attached image, you can see the rough distribution of this gene over time around that region. And this lactase persistence mutation, as geneticists call it, is a gene or a mutation that allows humans to continue processing lactose, which is the sugar found in milk, all the way up until including adulthood. Of course, as humans, we are born with the ability to process milk as babies. However, we quickly lose it. But what this mutation does, it allows adults to continue drinking and processing milk. And according to this related study, which was done using human remains and the genetic material taken from them at the Tellens Valley battle site, which is the largest and most ancient battle site found in Europe, and somewhere in northern Germany. According to this study and the samples that he took from there, the ability to process lactase, which is to say this lactase persistence mutation, actually proliferated around the human population relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, around 3,000 years-ish, which is very, very quick in evolutionary terms, which normally takes tens of thousands of years at least for something to proliferate so quickly. And many scientists speculate that it's mostly because of the obvious advantage of an adult being able to continue processing a relatively abundant but also rich and nutritious foodstuff. But of course, possibly and even probably, there are many more factors in play here. And here we see it spreads not only in Europe, but all the way throughout the human population. We see here, in particular, this relief taken from Sumeria around 3000 BC, where it's dated, where we see the Sumerians having not only domesticated, but also milking the cows, and then further taking that milk and processing it into dairy food products such as cheese, butter, and perhaps yogurt. So, when we get towards the modern history of milk consumption, we of course begin at the Industrialization of America, where we see the pattern of factories cropping up in cities, needing a large workforce. People move into the cities in urbanization patterns to help staff these factories and make a living. And then what happens is farmers, especially dairy farmers who previously lived in or near the cities, move out or move further out to the hinterlands. And then we see this divide between the food producers and the food consumers, which is, say, the workforce in the city working these factories. So then that's where you get these milk distributors, whose entire business model was to go out, buy the milk from these dairy farmers who've been somewhat disaffected and pushed out by urbanization and industrialization, and then distribute it to the workforce so that they can make some money, as well as the farmers being able to sell their product. And then that's where we get the glass milk bottle. As far as we can tell, the first US patent of a dedicated glass milk bottle was developed by one Dr. Henry Thatcher in New York in 1884. He was inspired by the rather unsanitary working conditions of standard milk delivery men at the time. In particular, an incident he witnessed where a young girl dropped her dirty rag doll into the open milk container that the milk delivery man was using to ladle out via a wooden spoon his milk product into an open container for the customer. This is that particular incident that spurred him to create what is generally agreed to be the first dedicated common sense milk bottle, as you can see on the right. And as Providence happens, here we see a picture of Dr. Thatcher on the left, having sold his first milk bottles to Mr. Wilcox on the right. And here we see an advertisement for his milk bottle, absolutely pure milk. You see clearly, it was a very big part of the marketing from this doctor that his milk was clean, which is the whole reason why he invented it. It was a very big thrust in his marketing push. The original bottles from 1894 all the way to 1899 were all hand blown due to the fact that there were no machines at the time. However, quickly in 1903, Dr. Thatcher lost control of the company and had to sell. And then in 1905, the company, which still bore his name, Thatcher, quickly switched to machine manufactured glass by that point. So that is the overview of the Thatcher bottle, but here you see a more standard milk bottle. And we'll go over some basic identification guides for what you might find for a standard milk bottle you might find around here. So note the flared finish, which is to say the lip of the bottle, how it flares outward, the wide rim, relatively wide neck, very easy for pouring. These bottles were stopped by either a glass or a tin stopper attached via a wire, and of course it helps to pour milk out when it's a very wide glass. And then milk bottles tend to be, and usually are, either clear or lightly straw colored, which is say slightly yellowish tint. A lot of that could be due to the condition you find it in, but generally speaking, milk was white, of course, and milk manufacturers and bottlers wanted to show off the cleanness of the milk, so clear bottles were always the industry standard. Milk bottles are always thick and heavy to survive transport on wagons and later on trucks, so the construction is always relatively sturdy. These bottles were meant to be given back and reused, so they were made with durability in mind to survive rough, bumpy roads and rough handling at times. And of course, you see the labeling clearly, the raised embellishment that says 1 pint, which was a very standard measurement to give per bottle at a time. These are all very basic, but very handy, clear signs of milk bottles. Here you see more. You see on the lips the evidence of that machine tooling around the rim, very, very reminiscent of machine hand or machine made glass bottles. Here you see clear. If you notice, the labeling says Purity Dairy, J.D. Rogers, and San Diego. Of course, if you remember, these milk bottles and milk manufacturers and distributors were all local affairs mostly. The bottles weren't necessarily local, but the manufacturers and distributors were, because milk spoiled quickly in this era before refrigeration, which is why milk deliveries were almost daily. So, of course, many of them were labeled with the local area in mind for the market that they were meant to serve, because many of these dairies and distributors were all local businesses and functional part of the communities. And here you see at the bottom of these milk bottles the little circular valve mark. On the left you see it overlapping the P. On the right it's just by itself. And this is a what is called a circular valve mark, which is a clear indication of the press and blow method, which is a very common method for making milk bottles. And usually this dates this around the 1910s to the 1940s as a very rough guide. And here you see modern milk bottles from a dairy up in Canada, which more or less still uses the same design. So this design is fundamental to milk bottles then as it is now today. And here is another Thatcher's bottle, a much later Thatcher's bottle. If you notice the colored labeling, which is called Pyroclastic Glazing, which is a technique that the Thatcher's company invented, automatically, if you happen to find a bottle like this, dates it to post 1934. Very important. Thatcher's bottles tend to be very valuable and very sought after. So here we see the cultural impact of the milkman and the milk delivery man. Of course, anyone today still recognizes the image of the man in the white suit carrying a 6-pack or an 8-pack, what have you, of glass bottles of milk, driving a milk truck, or even walking like we see on the right. A very famous image taken from the Blitzkrieg in London in World War II of a milkman continuing to carry on his duties. Very iconic. But even the image on the left, which is just standard milkman, is almost a cultural meme at this point, even though it's a more or less obsolete image from a bygone era. Almost everyone today can still recognize the clean image of a milkman carrying his milk. And of course, it's left even greater cultural impacts beyond the visual. Stephen King famously wrote a short horror story about a murderous milkman going town to town. And then, of course, you got Benny Hill, the famous comedian, his song Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, cleverly referencing the common adulterous milkman joke that everyone still makes today. And as it happens, coincidentally or not, Benny Hill was once a milkman himself, as it was a very common profession back in his time. And of course, let's not forget the most famous reference to the milkman of all, The Simpsons. I'd like to give a special thanks to the San Diego Archaeological Center for providing access to their collections, and to the SDAC collections manager, Jessica McFeeters, who so graciously helped out on this project and took pictures of their artifacts and specimens for me to use. Thank you very much. Your help was absolutely invaluable. Here are my citations and sources. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending my presentation, and I hope you have a good day.